And legislators from both parties and from all corners of the state have proposed hundreds of different ideas of their own to be considered. But what I believe the overall theme of this legislative session should be about is increasing accountability. More accountability for the violent criminals who are shooting and killing people in the streets of Baltimore City. More accountability in our local school systems for the billions of tax dollars they spend, making sure that those tax dollars actually make it into the classrooms, and holding them accountable for improvements in our schools and achieving better results for our children. But I believe it should also be about more accountability for public officials as well, making sure that they are deserving of the trust that people have placed in them, ensuring that public officials are actually serving the people and not simply themselves or special interests. When I first ran for governor, I promised to restore Maryland's economy and to put Marylanders back to work. But I also said that I would try to change politics as usual in Annapolis. And on my very first day as governor, just after being sworn in, I issued my very first executive order, which began to hold public officials more accountable. And we outlined a set of new standards of conduct that my cabinet and staff, as well as all employees of every single agency in the entire executive branch of government, would be held to from top to bottom. And since that day, for 5 years, our administration has been diligently rooting out corruption and wrongdoing. These efforts have resulted in over 200 indictments. In 2017, after the indictment of numerous state legislators, I pushed for, and the legislature enacted, the first comprehensive ethics reform in more than 15 years, which required tough standards to be applied, not just to the executive branch, but to the legislative branch as well. However, it has become clear in recent months and recent weeks that sadly, a pervasive culture of corruption continues to exist, and it is clear that even tougher and more stringent laws are needed. We've all been outraged to repeatedly see current and former legislators, along with local elected officials, county school superintendents, and others who've been indicted for abusing the public trust and using their offices for criminal activity. Just in the last 5 years, more than a dozen state, county, and local officials in Maryland have been charged with fraud and bribery. In the past few months, the former mayor of Baltimore was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges including wire fraud and tax evasion. 3 weeks ago, a legislator resigned after being accused of taking nearly $34,000 in bribes to advocate for cannabis legislation. And another pled guilty and was sentenced just last week after misusing campaign funds to pay her own personal expenses. This criminal behavior cannot and will not be tolerated. So today I am introducing the Ethics and Accountability in Government Act of 2020, which will strengthen and toughen state ethics laws in an effort to help restore the public's trust and to bring further transparency, accountability, and honesty to Annapolis. The Ethics and Accountability Act will dramatically increase the fines for bribery of a public official by 1,000%. up to $100,000. And these fines will not only apply to those public officials receiving and/or soliciting the bribes, but also to those responsible for paying or offering the bribes as well. This new law will also require legislators and state employees who are convicted of abusing the public trust to forfeit their taxpayer-funded pensions. These standards already apply to constitutional officers in the executive branch. There's no reason why it should not also apply to legislators. The Ethics and Accountability in Government Act will also prohibit the misuse of confidential information acquired during state service by former officials and employees. And finally, this legislation will empower the Ethics Commission to directly assess civil penalties against public officials and other state employees, giving the Ethics Commission authority equal to that which it currently has with regard to ethics violations regarding lobbying. For the entire 5 years that I have been governor, I've been fighting to clean up the mess in Annapolis and to bring more transparency and accountability to state government. That standard should not just apply to the executive and legislative branches, but it should also apply to the judicial branch as well. That's why we are again introducing the Judicial Transparency Act, which will require the Maryland State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy to track and publish detailed information on the sentences that are handed down by judges for violent crimes. The public does have a right to know about the sentences that judges are giving to the most violent offenders. In closing, the most important legislation of this entire session are our bills to hold violent criminals more accountable so that we can stop the shootings and the murders in Baltimore City. We have repeatedly introduced legislation to require tougher sentencing for violent offenders, especially those who commit violent felonies with guns. Shockingly, with more than 300 murders every year, city leaders and some lawmakers in Annapolis have continually failed to take these actions. Without these bills, the efforts to get these shooters and violent criminals off our streets simply cannot be successful. Violent criminals off our streets is the #1 priority. This is the #1 problem facing the state. It's the #1 concern of Marylanders. Our bills have the support of 90% of the people in Maryland, and even higher support in Baltimore City. This absolutely must be job one for the legislature when they begin this session. Nothing is more important. So we look forward to welcoming the legislature back to Annapolis. Welcome all of you that are here this morning. Our hope is that we can all stay focused and work together in a bipartisan fashion on the issues that really are most important to all of our citizens, that it'll be a productive 90 days, and that together all of us can live up to the trust and the confidence that the citizens in Maryland have placed in us. Thank you.